One swing on a golf course just exposed a problem the WNBA can't keep hiding. Because when Caitlin Clark stepped onto that fairway, it didn't feel like an off-day hobby. It felt like a message. Not the kind you send in a press release. The kind you send when you realize the world is watching you, and the people in charge still don't know what to do with you. And here's the part that makes it uncomfortable. This story isn't really about golf. It's about power. It's about who gets to control a superstar, and what happens when the superstar starts controlling the room. Because for months, the WNBA lived in a strange reality. They had their biggest spotlight in years. They had sellouts. They had nonstop clips. They had a player who could drag casual fans into the sport with one logo 3 and one deadpan smile. But they also had tension. And then, right when the league needed unity the most, the conversation around Caitlin turned into something else entirely. Not just basketball, a storm. And what happened next didn't explode on a court. It exploded somewhere nobody expected. But first, you need to understand why Caitlin Clark became more than a rookie. She became a symbol. Not because she asked to, because the public decided she was. On one side, you had fans who treated her like the main character of the entire sport. Like every foul was personal, like every headline was a conspiracy, like every moment should revolve around her. On the other side, you had people rolling their eyes, saying the hype was too much, saying the coverage was unfair, saying the league is bigger than one player. And in the middle, Caitlin, just trying to play basketball while the internet turned her into a debate topic. That targeting conversation didn't come from nowhere. People watched the physical play. They watched the bumping. They watched the hard screens and the extra contact. Some said it was normal rookie treatment. Others said it was something more. The league addressed the chatter publicly, but the vibe never fully calmed down. Because once fans believe a star is being treated differently, they don't let it go. Every whistle becomes evidence. Every no call becomes a screenshot. Every clip becomes a trial. And if you're the commissioner, that's not just drama. That's risk. Because sponsors don't pay for chaos. They pay for momentum that looks safe, clean, and predictable. And Caitlin, whether anyone liked it or not, had become the center of the league's most unpredictable energy. But the wild part is, the pressure didn't peak when she was getting bumped around on a random Tuesday night. It peaked when the conversation shifted from how she plays to who she belongs to. Because once a player becomes bigger than the system starts doing something subtle. It tries to shrink the player back down. Not always openly, not always intentionally, but it happens. A superstar starts generating attention, and suddenly everyone around them feels the heat. Teammates feel overlooked. Opponents feel disrespected. Veterans feel like history is being rewritten. Media turns everything into a comparison. And online fans turn every disagreement into a war. So what does leadership do? Leadership tries to keep the product stable. They want the league to look bigger than one person. They want to avoid the image that the WNBA is Caitlin and everyone else. They want to protect relationships with players who've built the league for years. They want to protect the brand. And that sounds reasonable, until it starts feeling like the league is asking its biggest draw to dim her own light for the sake of harmony. That's the tightrope. Celebrate her too hard, and you risk alienating others. Don't celebrate her enough, and you risk alienating the fans who followed her in. And that's when a single alleged quote hit like a match near gasoline. Because the moment you tell a star, directly or indirectly, you should be grateful, you change the entire relationship. It stops being a partnership. It starts feeling like ownership. And that's where this story takes a sharp turn. Because in late 2025, a claim came out that Commissioner Cathy Engelbert had allegedly said Caitlin Clark should be grateful to the league for her sponsorship success, implying that without the WNBA platform, that money wouldn't exist. That allegation didn't stay quiet. It spread fast. And the reason it spread so fast is simple. Even if you like the commissioner, even if you love the league, even if you think the quote was taken wrong, the idea of it felt real to people. It fit the fear that the league didn't understand the moment it was living in. And when Minnesota Lynx star Napheesa Collier put that accusation into the world, it wasn't just WNBA drama. It landed like a broader indictment of leadership, pay, respect, and how players feel behind the scenes. Then came the denial. Engelbert publicly denied making those specific comments and pushed back on the accuracy of what was being reported and repeated. But here's what people don't get about modern sports controversy. A denial doesn't rewind the internet. It doesn't erase the feeling. It doesn't rebuild trust automatically. Because by the time a denial arrives, the story has already evolved into something bigger. A question of whether the league truly values its players, and whether it knows how to handle the biggest spotlight it has ever had. And the timing couldn't have been worse, because the WNBA was also staring down massive business pressure, including the kind of money conversations that can change everything: salaries, revenue sharing, and the next era of the league. Caitlin herself called the ongoing CBA talks the biggest moment the WNBA has ever seen. So imagine the optics. Players want more. Fans want growth. Sponsors want stability. The league wants control. And right in the middle of that tension, the public hears a story that sounds like "be grateful." Even if it wasn't said like that, it felt like that to a lot of people. And when people get that feeling, they start looking for proof. They start watching how other organizations treat her. They start comparing. And that's when the LPGA walked in like, "We'll take the attention if you don't want it." Because while all this basketball tension was simmering, Caitlin Clark showed up somewhere else. And the vibe was completely different. No arguments about her belonging. No weird energy about her hype. No awkward "tone it down." Instead, it was smiles, cameras, and a clear message. We know exactly what this moment is worth. The event was the Onica driven by Gainbridge, held at Pelican Golf Club in Bel Air, Florida. Caitlin participated in the Pro-Am, and it wasn't a random invite. She was tied to the event as a Gainbridge ambassador, and the organizers weren't shy about making her a featured part of the week. They weren't treating her like a problem to manage. They were treating her like an opportunity to maximize. And when you put a superstar in an environment that feels like respect, people notice the contrast immediately. Golf Channel built coverage around it. They highlighted her presence. They leaned into the curiosity. They made it accessible for fans who just wanted to watch her do something new. And the visuals did the rest. Crowds gathered early. Phones were up. Every swing looked like content. And because it was golf, slower, calmer, cleaner, the internet could project something onto it. This is what it looks like when a league understands marketing. It didn't matter if she hit a perfect shot or a messy one. The storyline wasn't her scorecard. The storyline was the energy. She played alongside names like Nelly Korda, and the whole thing felt like a crossover episode the sports world didn't realize it needed. And then a year later, she came back again, with even more attention, and this time with Indiana Fever teammates like Lexi Hull and Sophie Cunningham involved as caddies, turning it into a full-on moment. This is where people start exaggerating online, because that's what the internet does. Suddenly you see posts like, "Golf is doing everything right." Suddenly you see fans saying, "WNBA doesn't deserve her." Suddenly you see engagement farmers screaming, "Sponsors are leaving." Now let's slow down for 1 second, because the truth is usually more boring than the headline. Sponsors don't always pull out in some dramatic Hollywood way. They reposition. They shift. They test budgets. They move attention from one property to another. And that's still terrifying for a league, because it's the same message, just in a quieter language. We're watching where the energy goes. That's what this golf moment represented to people. Not that Caitlin was abandoning basketball. Not that she was switching sports. But that she had something the WNBA couldn't fully control. She could take her attention anywhere. And wherever she goes, cameras follow. Where cameras follow, brands follow. And where brands follow, money follows. That's the real panic for any commissioner. Not did she play golf, but did the world just see a better blueprint for using her stardom than we did? Because the LPGA didn't need to fight about whether Caitlin should be celebrated. They just celebrated her. They didn't need to argue about whether hype is disrespectful to veterans. They just turned hype into ticket sales, coverage, social clips, and goodwill. And that's why so many people framed it like an insult to the WNBA, whether that was fair or not. Because the contrast was sharp enough to feel like a statement. And that's when sponsor anxiety starts to creep in. Because sponsors care about 3 things more than anything: attention, tone, and safety. Attention is obvious. You want eyes. Tone matters because brands don't want to be placed next to ugly narratives. Fans fighting, players angry, controversies spiraling. Safety matters because sponsors hate unpredictability. They want to know what they're buying. So if you're a brand watching the WNBA and you see constant online conflict around the league's biggest draw, you start asking questions. Not always publicly, privately, in meetings, in emails. You ask, how do we align with the Clark effect without stepping into the mess? You ask, Is this league stable? You ask, what happens if the narrative turns? You ask, should we diversify and attach to her in other settings too? And then you watch her show up in golf. And it looks clean. It looks celebratory. It looks like the entire story is simply, Caitlyn is cool and people like watching her. No fighting required. That's when the quiet repositioning begins. Not necessarily a dramatic pullout, but a subtle reallocation. More crossover campaigns, more multi-sport visibility, more we love women's sports branding that doesn't lock into one league's drama cycle. And if you're the WNBA, that's scary because it means you can't monopolize your own biggest star's commercial gravity. You can have her under contract and still watch the world build a bigger stage around her elsewhere. And the craziest part, that doesn't just affect sponsors. It affects players, because players see it too. They see how quickly attention moves. They see how easy it is for narratives to form outside the league. They see that personal brands can explode without needing permission from the system. And once that realization hits, a different kind of ripple spreads through locker rooms. If she can do it, why can't I? That's why you started seeing more chatter in women's basketball about off-season options, alternative leagues, new projects, new business models, and players building their own lanes instead of waiting for the league to hand them one. It's not always rebellion. Sometimes it's survival. Sometimes it's ambition. Sometimes it's just smart. Because for years, players have said the quiet part out loud. The money doesn't match the product. The attention doesn't match the talent. The system doesn't match the moment. And when you're in that environment, you start thinking differently. You stop thinking, how do I fit into the league's plan? You start thinking, how do I build my own plan? Caitlyn didn't invent that mindset, but her spotlight amplified it. Because her presence forces a question the WNBA can't dodge anymore. Are we building a league where superstars feel protected, celebrated, and maximized? Or are we building a league where superstars feel managed, minimized, and politicized? And before anyone gets mad, let's be clear. The WNBA is full of elite players, full of stars, full of legends, full of women who have carried the sport when nobody cared. That's exactly why this moment is so sensitive. Because when a new superstar arrives and the attention tilts, the sport has to evolve without disrespecting the foundation. That's hard, but it's also unavoidable. And that's why leadership matters so much right now. Because the commissioner's nightmare isn't just sponsors shifting money. It's losing control of the story. And once you lose the story, you lose the emotional relationship with fans. You lose the feeling that the league is the home of the biggest moments. And you start becoming just one platform among many. That's the real threat of the golf moment. Not that Caitlyn Clark is leaving the WNBA, but that the world is learning it doesn't need the WNBA to enjoy Caitlyn Clark. It can enjoy her anywhere. And that means the league has to compete for its own spotlight, which is a wild sentence to even say. Now here's where it gets even more intense, because this isn't happening in a vacuum. The WNBA's business future is in a pressure cooker. Players are pushing for a bigger share. Fans are demanding a better product. The league is growing fast enough that every decision is magnified. Caitlyn said the CBA negotiations are the biggest moment in league history. And she's not wrong, because that's where growth becomes real money, not just vibes and viral clips. So if you're the league office, you're thinking about rights deals, salaries, expansion, and long-term stability. If you're the players, you're thinking, we helped build this growth, where's our share? If you're the fans, you're thinking, don't mess this up. And if you're a sponsor, you're thinking, how do we attach to the cleanest version of this story? That's why these controversies matter. Not because the internet enjoys drama, because money follows narratives, and narratives shape leverage. So when the Grateful allegation hit, and even after it was denied, it became a symbol of a bigger feeling. Players versus leadership, stars versus systems, value versus credit. Who gets credit for Caitlyn's sponsorships? The league says, our platform matters. The public says, she's the platform. The players say, we've been the platform. Sponsors say, we'll pay whoever holds attention and looks safe. That's not a debate you solve with one statement. That's a tension you manage with years of trust building. And the reason people framed it like Adam Silver's worst day, even though the WNBA has its own commissioner and structure, is because it fits a familiar sports fear. The NBA ecosystem is watching women's sports become bigger business, and the worst-case scenario is a leadership moment that fumbles generational momentum. And Caitlyn's golf moment felt, to some fans, like proof that other organizations can capitalize faster. So what happens next? This is where everyone rushes to the most dramatic ending. They want a breakup story. They want Caitlyn to leave. They want sponsors to pull out. They want chaos. But the real story is quieter, and honestly, it's more brutal. The real story is that Caitlyn Clark is going to keep playing basketball and keep building a universe around herself that no commissioner can fully control. That's modern sports. The athlete is the brand, the league is the platform, and the fans choose where to point their attention. If the league aligns with the athlete, both win. If the league fights the athlete, or even just looks like it's fighting her, the athlete still wins, and the league gets blamed for the tension. That's why this is such a delicate moment for the WNBA. Because if the league wants to protect its future, it has to do something that sounds simple, but is insanely hard in practice. It has to let its biggest stars be bigger than the league, without the league feeling smaller. It has to celebrate Caitlyn in a way that doesn't erase Aya Wilson, Breanna Stewart, Napheesa Collier, and the rest of the league's elite. It has to fix officiating optics so fans don't feel like games are wars. It has to build a culture where rookies don't feel like targets and veterans don't feel like they're being replaced by hype. And it has to do all of that while negotiating the most important financial moment in league history. That's the job. And if leadership fails that job, sponsors don't need to pull out. They just need to move their money 1 inch at a time until the league realizes the spotlight has shifted. So when you see Caitlyn Clark smiling on a golf course, shaking hands, soaking in the crowd, and turning a Pro-Am into a headline, don't just see golf. See leverage. See a star learning in real time that she can take her energy anywhere. And see a league learning in real time that you can't manage a movement the way you manage a player. Because this isn't just about one athlete. It's about the future shape of women's sports, where the biggest names will build their own highways if you keep telling them to stay in their lane. And if you're the WNBA, the question isn't, how do we stop her from doing side quests? The question is, how do we make the main quest so good that nobody wants to look away? Now I want to hear what you think. Did the golf moment prove the WNBA is mishandling its biggest spotlight? Or did the internet just turn a fun event into unnecessary drama? Drop your take in the comments. And if you want more stories where sports power moves in the shadows and the headlines don't tell the full truth, hit subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because the next chapter of this WNBA era is going to get even louder.